Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can follow me on Twitter at Braden Gall.
Mine's Erin Dugan. You can follow me on Twitter at the Erin Dugan or Instagram Erin_Dugan.
Erin is battling today, folks. She is highly questionable for the end of the pod. That's it's not a new thing for us on the show.
Have I been not questionable in the last month?
Yeah, that's a fair point. You're opening to like a whole new business and everything. You're a very busy person, so it's understandable that that you're questionable. As a father of two small children, I'm also questionable every day. So it's just welcome to the show, folks. Welcome to the show. Please rate, review, subscribe, share the product, follow us on the Twitters, check out the YouTube. Erin and the fam does a great job putting everything together. We're just going to refer to your brother, by the way, as the fam from here on out on the show, if that's okay with him.
Young Sean P. Diddy Dugan, we call him.
Way better than the fam. So
yeah,
give old P Diddy some love. But go check out the YouTube. Of course, you guys do a great job getting the show up every single week for y'all's enjoyment. Coming up on the show today, not a lot of topics, but I think we've got some fun topics, and we're taking a little bit of a break from our State of the Union tour around the SEC. We will talk with Chris Spatola of ESPN. He is a college basketball analyst because the tournament. So he's going to give you every single SEC team. He's going to break down every single one that made the tournament. So he's going to talk Tennessee, Kentucky, Auburn, Arkansas, LSU, Alabama, Final Four predictions, the future of the tournament, and how it could just be the Power Five and their own 65 team tournament, and what that would mean for brackets and fans and everything. So fascinating conversation. I love Chris. He's an awesome dude. So Chris Spatola coming up a little bit later on in the show. Again, a little minor break from football, not very often, but occasionally. Some fan rules we thought we would discuss today on the show, because I see a lot of sensitive fans in the SEC in particular, and not just SEC, but everywhere. Some rules that we thought, some guidelines we thought we would lay out for fans to just make, here's some rules that you should follow if you'd like to be a high quality, elevated sports fan in the SEC.
You mentioned that last year that Godfrey laid out a few of what he felt like were the most sensitive teams. And do you want to name those, Braden?
What I asked is,
I have a nickname for these teams.
Oh, do you? Okay. So we were talking about media and LSU, and how the LSU media probably wasn't going to dive and dig too deep into all the things around right. Coach O and Les Miles. And while that might be doing obviously a disservice to any of the victims of that LSU, and certainly the fans, that maybe the fans don't want to know. And I asked Godfrey, I said, well, who are like the worst media conglomerates in the SEC? And he first mentioned Clemson, which of course is not in the SEC. That the Clemson media, just all they do is like carry water for the university. He mentioned Tennessee, Florida, and LSU as the big three in the conference that, as a collection of media members, don't really hold the university accountable or feet to the fire, or are critical of certain things, or, they're going to serve their own master a little bit, if that makes sense. Like, if it benefits their media company to tell everybody that a coach should be fired, they're going to do it. But really, they're just there as like homers.
The first three he named, he got around to LSU, but we're Clemson, Florida, and Tennessee.
Yep.
The ladies in orange. That's what I named them.
Can we add Auburn to that list?
Yeah, of course. And that makes sense. It's not even a stretch.
No, it's not. And it's not at all. And I think I can't tell if Alabama is in that group, but I
don't think they are. Well, media, I don't know, but the fans, like we're going to talk about. Yeah. I don't think so.
So what part of why I wanted to do this is I'm just so sick and tired of college fans bitching about their seating in the tournament. I can't do it anymore.
You literally can't.
No, if you are like and it's all my alma mater, it's Tennessee fans. All you guys have spent 72 consecutive hours complaining about being a 3 seed, when that's probably true, but it doesn't actually change anything. If you're good enough to make it to the Final Four, you actually got a better draw in the 3 seed line that you got than if you would have been a 2 seed. I just, and Chris is going to talk about this a little bit later on. So I thought we would spend some time today just sort of laying out, here are some guidelines for good fandom, elevated, classy fandom. We could strive, much like Jasper's, to be the next evolution of the fandom here in the SEC. So we'll spend a few minutes on that. We're going to start with name, image, and likeness, though, because of the huge story in The Athletic about an $8 million contract being doled out to not even a student athlete, a prospective student athlete. We're going to explain a little bit about what that means for people, what you need to know, what it means for the SEC, and sort of recruiting moving forward. So we're going to do all of that today on the show. However, Fringe Element is brought to you by the wonderful folks at
Jaspers.
And Jaspers, right now, this week, I guess it's over the course of the next few weeks, has a gift for you, folks.
They do indeed. Tell them what the gift is, Braden.
Thank you, Erin. Go to the Twitter account at 440 Sports. There's a link right there pinned on top of the profile to a bracket challenge. Free to enter for anyone who listens to the show. Go enter the bracket challenge. The winner will get a $100 gift card to Jaspers, which also can be used on any of their other locations. They've got locations in Mississippi and in Alabama, but a bunch of different restaurants in Nashville. So if you're listening to the show and you want to compete, Erin's in there, I'm in there. Fill out your bracket. One entry, you heathens. You get one entry, one sheet of integrity. And Jaspers is going to give away free money. So free stuff on the show. Go to Jaspers and check out the Twitter account on 440 Sports and fill out your bracket, all right?
I don't want people coming in and criticizing brackets or our knowledge based on our bracket, because I would venture to say, I fill my bracket out very quickly, because whenever you really try to think through it, you just spend so long and something screws you up. So I go somewhere between the marriage of sports knowledge and clicking really fast. Because don't you feel like when you really, really try, you're like, oh, okay, I'm really going to think this through. And then something crazy happens in the first round, your whole bracket screwed up.
So it's like the Tinder profile of sports gambling.
Yes.
Right? Like you're just like, boom, 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 Gonzaga, boom, Tennessee, boom, Louisville, boom, Michigan. Oh, no, not you, Duke, not you, Kentucky. And
you've got to pick you've got in those 5-12, 4-13 matchups, you got to pick some lower seeds in those. Those will always get you.
6-11s. The 11s have won a lot of games lately in the last few years. I've never been on Tinder, but I appreciate you giving me the
I don't have
stamp
Tinder.
Of approval.
I don't use Tinder either.
No, you only use
the
dating
trashiest.
Apps. You only use dating apps where you have to be approved to be on the dating app. It's very fancy. It's very fancy.
The stingier, the better.
It's on brand for us talking about being elevated this week. All right. Elevated sports fans.
I don't know if elevated could describe me at all right now. Also, there are birds of prey circling outside my window, and I'm pretty sure they're coming for me.
They know
what's left of me. They know I'm close to death.
Yeah, it's like the Beatles vultures from Robin Hood, where they're just like.
That's exactly what it's like.
Oh God. Okay. Go to Jaspers, the next elevation of the sports bar. We're going to give you the next elevation of sports fandom, and only on the next elevation of dating apps. Okay.
Go before you die.
Go to Jaspers. Okay. So the name, image, and likeness story out by The Athletic. There's been a lot of follow-ups on this, a lot of interviews, and a lot of talk about this. And I thought we would try to lay it out real quickly for SEC fans. What do we think it means for the future moving forward? Because I think the headline is pretty monstrous. And it feels really heavy. I think we want to clarify some of the things that people are saying about all of this. Now, this was a 2023 5-star recruit. This is, again, according to The Athletic, Stuart Mandel, I believe, had a chance to look at the contract that was signed. It's a $350,000 signing bonus and up to $2 million per year for this particular athlete over the course of his college career. And there's a bunch of different things you kind of need to know about this. Probably a quarterback. I'm just guessing here, but probably a quarterback.
Most marketable.
Not allowed to put, the school specifically, because this has been signed with a collective. So nobody even knows which collective this was. If you want to know what a collective is, go back and listen to our episode about collectives a few weeks ago. What's fascinating is that it's not what this is you're selling your own name, image, and likeness rights. You're not actually endorsing any companies. What this collective is doing is signing the exclusive rights of this athlete to then go out and try to sell it to advertisers or marketers or promotional people or whatever. And I find it like the hit rate on a 5-star quarterback is probably about 50%. So if this is a 5-star quarterback, there's a 50-50 chance this guy's not even going to be good at football. Mm-hmm. And if he's not good at football, there's no way in hell you are recouping $8 million in endorsement deals for this player.
There are some things written in there to protect these collectives.
Not in this particular deal, but many.
But yes, but others.
And I want to get to how this could turn predatory for athletes very quickly. I think that's a major concern. But I think
we can go back to that.
Because this deal seems to have been written out very carefully by a lawyer, and which is how we all have seen it anyway. It's fascinating to me. Like, what you're going to have is communication between your collective at your school. Let's say LSU's collective or Tennessee's collective or Alabama's collective, and the coaching staff with which players they want, which is not going to be legal because the school's not allowed to talk to the collective. But if the Tennessee collective goes out and offers $6 million to a recruit, the Tennessee coaching staff better want that player.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, you can get yourself into some trouble
very quickly. This is a new, I don't know, this article specifically that we were reading about this particular athlete with the $8 million, could get $8 million by the end of his junior year. This article definitely opened my mind to a few other things about, not only how this could go wrong, but just how words are hard for me right now.
It could go wrong a lot of different ways. I agree with you. That's one of the things that I took away from it.
But then how the donor driven stuff works as well. If we want to get into that a little bit, the donor driven, like third party, and how those are tied to specific schools. So in some contracts, you just have to sign with an NCAA institution. But what if some of that contract money was given or promised by school specific donors? Can you explain that to me, or what you took away from that?
So this is where you have to understand what a collective is. A collective is operating on behalf of a university, but not allowed to communicate with the university. The university can have no impact or input on what this collective does, but everybody sort of knows that. I think it's Spire Sports or something like that. That is clearly driven. It is about the University of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And frankly, they're ahead of the curve. Tennessee is way ahead of the curve on this because, and there are a few programs that I think should be. South Carolina, I think Arkansas, I think there's a few programs in the SEC that could benefit the most from this if they get organized quickly. And Tennessee is right now sort of, the one that's ahead of this. And that's the one we talked about a couple of other weeks ago on the show. That collective then just goes out and sells your rights to advertisers and promotional companies. And sure, it could be a barbecue joint in Auburn, but it also could be a massive multi-million-dollar marketing firm from, that represents, like, I don't know, major international companies. Mm-hmm. So the collective represents unofficially a university. And when you sign with that collective, there's nothing in writing that says you have to go to Tennessee. But the language of the contract indicates that if you aren't at the University of Tennessee, then the contract is null and void. Things like you have to be able to. You can't
make appearances for your next university, which could potentially keep kids from wanting to ever enter the transfer portal.
Exactly, or sign somewhere else. So, like, if I'm a 5-star recruit out of Birmingham, and I decide to go to Tennessee and I sign a contract with this company that is going to sell all my name, image, and likeness, but then I decide to go to LSU instead. Mm-hmm. Well, if I can't be in Knoxville for bi-monthly appearances at whatever car wash or autograph session or community outreach thing, then obviously the contract is null and void, and then I don't get any of the money.
Right.
And so it's wild. I will admit right now that I was dead wrong about the dollar figures and how big this was going to spin up, how quickly it was going to spin up. And I thought for sure that, the free market would dictate all of this. I still think that's true, Aaron. Like, I still think how many contracts are going to be worth $8 million? I just don't think very many. I think this reminds me of the NBA drafting high school kids and all of them like burning out in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And They had to put the one and done rule in to protect the NBA from itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think these companies, unless you're just willing to fork over large sums of money to just randomly get players to come to your school, and then you're totally fine if it doesn't work out. I don't know.
Which leads us to some of the provisions that certain collectives or agencies or whatever we want to call them, collectives, I guess, are putting in there that could potentially be dangerous to the student athlete or their families or everybody in between, which in part of this article, it reads exactly this. In one draft version of another deal, The Athletic reviewed, The Athletic did this article, the collective agreed to pay an athlete $1.5 million across 2 years, but could from time to time, in quotes, ask for repayment of that money plus a 10% commission and expenses, even if the agreement were to be terminated. So if that doesn't scare you, it should as an athlete. And maybe, I think I'm understanding that correctly, which is just that.
If you don't fulfill the obligations, you can have to repay the money. Now, the way you stop that is to have representation looking over this. And this is where it gets predatory.
Yeah.
A lot of these companies are getting kids to sign these contracts without the contracts being reviewed by legal representation or agents or, management, whatever it might be. And so kids are definitely going to you need some professionals around you now.
Right. And even if you haven't signed, if you are in direct contact with someone listening, if you are a student athlete or in direct contact with someone who is in this particular situation, there are plenty of lawyers that would be happy to look over this stuff.
Yes.
Pro bono only with no payment on the front end. I know that it looks like, no matter which way you spin it, $2 million is better than just a scholarship. And that may be true, but someone will look over it for you without being paid extreme amounts on the front end.
Well, unless it's also it could be future earnings.
True.
So if you end up going to the league and you've got in your contract 3% of your future earnings go back to this other company, like the amount of ways this could become predatory is really scary. I agree with you on that. Even just this contract that The Athletic wrote about, which is it appears a very smart and savvy contract for this recruit.
That one. Mm-hmm.
The two quotes that the only way the contract could be quote unquote, I guess negated by the collective itself is if the athlete violates the confidentiality agreement
mm-hmm.
or doesn't display the quote utmost character and integrity. And that's the one that
that's too vague.
That's what I'm saying. That's like the lack of institutional control.
Yeah, that's too vague. And that should scare people because that can be skewed a lot of different ways and can be completely subjective. And that needs to have a lot more language around it.
Conduct detrimental to the league, Erin.
What
the hell does that mean?
That could be, yeah.
If you cheat academically, if you have DUIs or if you have drug arrests, I know what they're trying to.
Yeah, but then that could expand to a lot more things if it's not defined. I know what you're saying.
Also, who cares if somebody smokes some weed? Who cares? Like every other kid in college.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, and let's kind of spin this forward to the SEC and some of the good of this. And here's the one thing I want to remind people of. If you see what these athletes are actually doing for this money, it is almost exclusively really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's being out there in your community, signing autographs for kids. It's doing events at a local, whatever. It is going on a podcast so that fans of a particular team can learn more about their team. There's almost none of this stuff is really almost all this stuff is something you'd be proud to have your son or daughter do. It's not bad thing. It's all good stuff. It's just how it's all being managed right now is the complete wild, wild west. And I think if you're on the ground, let's say in Auburn, and you go into a barbecue joint, the Hound, no free shouts, and you see autographed photos of the entire offensive line, that's where you see the impact of it. That's where you're actually seeing what's taking place in real life, in front of your face. Whereas all of us who aren't in those communities, you're just sort of seeing an article about a kid or a story about an athlete or whatever. So I think that's one thing to remember.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is I do think the free market will slow some of this down naturally. It's going to build and build and build and build and build. And then I think it's going to come back to earth a little bit more naturally, because again, out of all the 5 stars, about a quarter of them get drafted in the first round. About half of them are pretty good. So like, you're going to have a lot of misses if you're handing out all these big contracts.
For sure. And I think that as we, take even another further step back, just keeping in mind, and this will be the responsibility of not only, the legal teams surrounding these athletes and just the school and everybody in between, keeping things in check. But what we don't want to happen is, the reason that this is a thing is because big business was beating out the goodness or the well-being of individuals, as in the student athletes. So what we don't want is big business, excluding big business, it being the NCAA in this case, going in favor of other big businesses, which in this case would be the collectives. So we need to make sure we don't trade, protecting a big business for protecting another big business, and make sure that the student athletes still come out on top, which is going to be definitely a learning curve for everybody involved in the process.
And I think for not just SEC fans, but all college football fans, what I think you need to look at is, and while I was dead wrong about the amounts of money, I still believe that I'm dead right about who this benefits the most. Of course, Alabama benefits. Of course, LSU benefits. Georgia is going to benefit. But I think who it benefits the most are the teams with a ton of like, thirsty fan bases with lots of money and not a lot of success. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a handful of those in the SEC, and this will include Texas, frankly, a team that's going to be in the SEC. South Carolina, number 1. Tennessee and South Carolina are the top 2. I think Kentucky and Arkansas would absolutely fall into that category, where you have a ton of money and not a whole lot of on-field success to show for all of that passion and commitment from the fans. Mm-hmm. And so I think if I'm South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, and maybe even Texas, if we've got all this money and we've got all these resources and we got nothing to show for it, this is how you're going to start taking recruits from Georgia and Alabama and Texas A&M, in my opinion.
And totally, when you think about schools like Arkansas specifically, and South Carolina in some ways, because, well, let me go Arkansas first. There's not professional athletics competing with the companies inside the state's budgets for marketing. So Arkansas is not really competing, for marketing dollars with any other sports team. There's nothing else in the state. South Carolina is that way to a certain extent. Like, you have teams close by, but South Carolina doesn't have a ton of competition. Texas is a different story, but it's also Texas. So, how they feel about high school recruits and how people follow them from these big high schools to University of Texas. So I don't think Texas marketing dollars is going to be a problem either. But for a lot of those schools, like you said, haven't had a lot of success, but do have a lot of big hungry fan bases, and especially ones that don't have a lot of teams to compete with, I think could pay off.
Yeah, I still think the same formula applies from the beginning of this to now, and even whatever it looks like in the future, which is that if you can leverage the resources of your fan base to acquire talent, this rule will help you. And that's like, again, there's lots of details and minutiae that we've just talked about, but that is sort of at its truest form, the way this particular rule could help. And again, I think it's Tennessee, South Carolina, Arkansas, Kentucky. I don't think Missouri has the same level of resources. Vanderbilt's got all the money it really wants, so it's more about like desire on Vanderbilt's part, and they don't have that really. A&M doesn't need it. They're spending and they're acquiring. Alabama, Auburn's been the national title game. Florida's won national championships. Georgia's the defending champ. So to me, it's about how do I leverage 90,000 people in a building that haven't seen anything successful? Yeah, that is where this has been. I still believe that's where this is the most helpful for teams. So just wanted to throw it out there. And what's interesting is how agile are these collective marketing campaigns going to be? Because we're coming up on the tournament, and it's one thing to like pinpoint a 5-star quarterback and like try to get in early on him and then have him market your brand for 4 years or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to not know who the walk-on shooting guard is, who's about to like drain a 3 to beat Gonzaga in the second round of the playoffs or second round of the tournament. and or a kicker who's like a walk-on kicker who comes off the bench who makes a field goal in the Iron Bowl, and all of a sudden we need to get that guy's face on a t-shirt or on an Instagram video or whatever. Like, how fast are we going to be able to turn this stuff around and actually create collateral?
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is all these states that put rules in place in the SEC that we thought, hey, these guys are ahead of the curve. They're actually now behind the curve, because it actually limits your ability to earn some of these regulations that these states passed. And now these states in the SEC are learning, oh, we need to get all this shit off the books.
Yeah.
Let the free market handle it. Let's get all these rules off the books. So it is. I am fascinated by it. I know everybody would rather us talk about like the Texas A&M quarterback battle, but I'm fascinated by this.
No, I mean, well, this is going to make a huge, huge difference. And like you just said, you almost want to be, you don't want to be last, but you also don't want to be first as you're going through this whole process. You almost want, someone to go before you. Now, the SEC is going to lead a lot of it because they're the most marketing dollars and like the highest potential for like revenue or contracting is going to be in the SEC because of the nature of the conference. But like you just said, if you're first, you might end up limiting yourself in some ways. You almost want to be very second to the rule making process in all of this. Watch people kind of stumble and then come back behind them second. I
agree with you on the rules. I don't agree with you on the like Tennessee, and I'll go back to Tennessee because I think they're doing it the best so far of anybody in the SEC. Tennessee was kind of first to launch their little collective, and they're up and running. That's already impacting 2023 recruiting. Like they are already doing better in the 2023 recruiting class because they had their company up and running first. Yeah, it's already affecting recruiting.
The regulation side's different.
Jesus, Congress, really?
You got it.
Congress has no desire to get involved in all this. It just needs to be all the rules.
Congress is busy.
Yeah, they might be busy. So anyway, it's fascinating stuff. It's sort of evolving. We will pride ourselves on admitting when we're wrong. I was wrong about the dollar figures. Yes, there's still lots of mom and pop shops doing $5,000 deals. But what we're talking about now, and if you go back and listen to our collective episode a couple of weeks ago, we're talking about $20-30 million for a recruiting class through the collective, which isn't sanctioned by the school, which I still want to know how the boss of the collective and the head football coach are going to jive talent acquisition. Like, how are you going to, like, is the guy running the collective going to call Josh Heupel and be like, hey, I got a 6'3", 240-pound defensive end. Do you want him? And Josh Heupel's going to be like, oh, he doesn't fit my scheme. Like, what do we, how, that's illegal. You can't do that.
I know, but
that's going to happen.
Crazier things have been done.
Oh, the information's going to,
it'll find its way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Who Nick Saban does and doesn't want will find its way to the Alabama collective somehow.
A really effective game of telephone.
Right. No, I said I didn't want that player. What are you talking about? All right. Some quick. So before we get to Chris Spatola, and again, I'm fascinated by, like, folks, honestly, watch this play out over the next 3.5-4 weeks. Watch how it works, because if High Note, the point guard for Arkansas, has an unbelievable game and they all of a sudden beat Gonzaga in the second or third round in the Sweet 16, like, how fast can they turn around merchandise, marketing, promotional materials, and get him out there? Because he's going to be super popular across the whole country. And this is his only earning window.
Who was it last year?
Like, let's go with an SEC foe here, because my parents went to Valparaiso. Bryce Drew in 1998 hits a game-winning three, and he's your former head coach, so you know him too.
I do.
So Bryce Drew hits a game-winning buzzer-beater three in the first round of the NCAA tournament to beat Ole Miss. How fast can that kid get his face onto an advertisement and profit on his name, image, and likeness? Because 3 weeks later, it's not going to matter anymore. He's going to be out of the collective consciousness at that point. So I can't wait. I can't wait to see how fast, what it looks like over the next month.
And then do they also have, do you go ahead and have deals in place with companies who can, market? Like, all I can think of is, what's the insurance company that's like Chaos?
They're all the same.
No, the Chaos guy. It comes in.
The guy who like pretends to be like the lightning strike.
Like he is the Chaos or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's not really the exact right idea, but if someone comes in and just completely, knocks out a 2 seed, like a 15 knocks out a 2, and they have some marketing campaign around this guy like creating chaos. I mean, Gonzaga is great, but Jalen Suggs is Bryce Drew is the perfect example. And then more currently, Jalen Suggs was, more well known than like some people would be like on a team that's not Gonzaga, but he wasn't a household name for people that don't. I mean, everybody watches March Madness. So if you weren't following really, really closely, like for people in the sports world, people knew who he was, but all of a sudden, everyone in the world knew who Jalen Suggs was.
The best players in college basketball, even on the best teams, are only relevant to national advertisers for like a month.
Yeah. So how quickly can you pivot? Yeah, that will be really interesting.
Like Zakai Ziegler for Tennessee is a very marketable personality, but he's not big enough to be worth anything yet. Mm-hmm. But if he were to get his, like, again, don't even think about buzzer beaters. Think about all the other cool stuff that happens in college basketball. Let's say he gets like elbowed in the nose and has like blood coming down his face and like, but he makes a great defensive play, right?
Right.
Like that's a t-shirt waiting to happen. A bloody faced point guard who's undersized, whose family's got this, crazy backstory where the house got burnt to the ground and like we raised all this money to help him. And like, he's got this personality and this big story now. How do we get that out there and marketable and helping our brand, quote unquote brand? Like,
yeah. Like how would a health insurance company, like what if they would have been able to jump on the Kevin Ware moment?
oh, the guy who broke his leg for Louisville.
Yeah. Louisville.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Accidents happen.
Yeah.
But how fast can that be turned around? What are the NCAA rules? What are your state rules? All this stuff has to be considered because, again, if you are on call as an athlete, you're not allowed to do any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So then it becomes a recruiting. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, great thing to look out for. That'll be fun to watch and see how that plays out.
It is so fascinating. And I think important to note, female athletes are going to make a fortune off of this, and that is awesome.
Yeah, awesome. All for that.
Awesome. Are you, Erin?
I am. Maybe they'll actually have a decent weight room too one day.
As a girl dad, I'm all about it, baby.
Love it.
All right. Okay. So quickly, let's do some fan rules here. Just a quick, because again, I'm just so tired of people complaining about seed lines. Like if you're good enough to make the Final Four, it doesn't matter what seed line you're on. If you're a 2 or a 3, it doesn't matter. So I thought we'd raise some rules here for football fans to be just better. Just be better. Okay. So I'm gonna run them past you and see what you think.
Okay.
Number 1 rule: kickers are people too.
We do need to remember this. Kickers have all the glory and all the hurt. What inspired this particular one, Braden? Anything?
John Vaughn.
Fair enough.
Former Auburn field goal kicker who missed 5 field goals in a game, I believe against LSU, and they lost. And then, of course, received death threats for the rest of his career.
Does anybody? I think we can all agree that's just too much.
Yeah, kickers are people, and they didn't cost your team. We'll get to didn't cost your team in just a second. All right, good first rule. We like that one.
Great first rule.
Kickers.
Am I supposed to be rating these?
I'm sure if you want to.
No, it's okay.
3 Jasper's burgers.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, number 2: don't tweet at recruits. Just don't do it. Don't tell them you wish that their ACL is torn if they go somewhere else. Don't tell them that they're, don't try to expose them for breaking the NIL rules. Like, don't tweet at them.
I'm going to translate all of these rules, even though they are kind of in layman's terms, but I'm going to translate them one step further. This rule is called get a life. Have something else to do besides tweet at recruits. You're 49 and they're 17. Get a life.
So rule number 1, kickers are people too, the John Vaughn rule. Rule number 2, don't tweet at recruits, the get a life rule.
Yes.
Rule number 3, the officials don't hate your team. The SEC offices are, Greg Sankey is not calling the head of officials and telling the head of officials to make calls against your team. It's not happening. There's 130 plays, 170 plays in a football game. You had opportunities to win or lose the game in other plays. It wasn't the officials' fault.
Ooh. This is the...
Same with the committee. The committee doesn't hate your team. They're just doing the best they can.
Yeah, this is like the Oh, what is this rule called? I had it on the tip of my tongue, but I'm doing good just to be sitting up straight right now.
You got two right. You got two pretty good.
Okay, I'll go back to that one.
Officials don't hate your team. Now, to be fair,
I don't care that much.
I hate your team. I hate all of your teams. Just so you know.
What's the thing where people say I wasn't something. I wasn't thinking about you at all. You know what I'm trying to say?
I have no clue what you're talking about.
God, I can't.
I'm not a fun young person anymore, so I don't know.
Okay, we'll go back to
but you know what I am? I'm a classy fan. So I think kickers are people. I don't tweet at recruits, and I know that officials didn't cost my team the game. Okay. This one's a little bit more complicated, but know your media. And we just got done talking about this, right? That with Godfrey and some of the media, there is space in the media nowadays for everything. If you want hot takes, if you want conversation, if you want yelling and screaming, if you want Homer fandom, if you want the team to produce content, which you've done at your alma mater, where you're creating documentaries and creating really cool content. Schools are production companies at this point. So you have to know which media are going to give you your team a fair shake. Know which people covering your team, which men and women are going to give you an accurate, objective analysis, and which ones are going to give you either hate or homerism. And sort of you have to understand which ones are which. And sometimes you might want the Homer take and just go get you some homerism. All right. You might want it to be blatantly, homerific. If you want it to be critical, or if you want it, just know your media to know what each person is sort of all about, if that makes sense. I know that one's a little tougher, but
it's like a right up the middle role. But if you're seeking higher or lower, you can find it. But if you just want to be given to you straight, I'm going to get through this episode. Given to you straight, there are outlets that you can find the truth in. Just depends on if you want it. Right.
The Dansby Swanson rule. He plays up the middle. I don't know. It's the best.
That works. I get it.
It's best.
I get it.
All right. Last but not least, no gunfights. I feel like this is a no-brainer, and really it just is no fights. If you're at a sports bar and you're in public and something happens to your team, don't get in a fight. If you're at the stadium and something happens to your team, don't get in a fight. If you're at the trailer park, don't pull out your shotgun and get in a fight after a sporting event.
It's not that serious.
As my 3-year-old walked into our bedroom and said the other day to her 5-year-old sister, life is just not that hard.
No, she didn't.
I swear to God, my 5-year-old was kind of whining and crying, and the 3-year-old walked in and just goes, man, life's just not that hard.
That is so funny and really defines their relationship.
It was perfect. It was
That's
perfect.
Awesome.
No gunfights. Okay.
Just not that serious.
No gunfights.
That should go without saying, but
Alabama fan looking at you, Alabama fan. All right. No gunfights.
It's happened to LSU too, hasn't it?
So that's what I've got. If you want to submit some, I would say don't pull out your genitalia in public, but LSU fans, they've already blown through that rule. So at the
you only make rules that might be followed, and apparently that one won't be.
Right. Kickers are people too. Don't tweet at recruits. Officials don't hate your team. Know your media, and no gunfights. Sound good?
Those are great.
I think we solved some problems today.
You killed that.
Thank you. Just like the gunfights.
I am a problem.
All right. Are we done?
I think we are.
All right. Chris Spatola from ESPN is going to cover a whole lot of stuff. He's going to break down Tennessee's chances at a national championship, Kentucky's chances at a national championship, why he's not buying the Auburn Tigers. Arkansas, he likes them. Not so sure on Alabama and LSU. He has his Final Four picks. And also, what would it look like if the Power Five, the college football Power Five, controlled every slot of the tournament, and that was just the 65-team tournament? What would it look like if we actually did have a breakaway and it was just the 65-team tournament of college football teams? What do the fans do? What does the media do? How does that all look? He's got it all for you. He's got it covered. So when we come back, you will hear from Chris Spatola of ESPN. Fringe Element is brought to you by, you can do it, Erin.
Jaspers. It's where you go to watch the tournament if you're not at the tournament.
If you are in Nashville, that's exactly what it is, actually. If you are in Nashville on, let's say, Thursday, depending on when you're listening to this, and it's perhaps in the afternoon, you will perhaps find myself and other 440 Sports hosts at Jasper's watching basketball, probably around that 1 p.m. Central Time mark. Just throwing it out there.
Assuming that they're in good health at that point. It's the best place to watch games. There's a lot of TVs. It is set up for this.
There's an actual game room with a big screen, so you could be playing games while watching games.
You can even rent that out and have all of your friends there to watch your team in the tournament.
There you go.
Should be a great call.
Come on,
somebody
by Jasper's.
Should do that.
Come on by Jasper's Thursday afternoon. We're going to be there. We're going to be watching games. We'll be drinking libations.
What time? I got to get this in my planner.
We'll be eating burgers and Cracker Jack wings or whatever they're called, and the sweet potato fries with barbecue and shrimp and good, all the good stuff from Jasper's. We will be consuming it and watching basketball deep into the evening. I'll take an Uber home, even though I can park for free. So
yeah, you're allowed to drink that early because it's March Madness.
100% the rule.
Yep.
It's also a rule for good fandom. You can drink.
Law.
You can drink before 2 p.m. if it's during March Madness.
Yeah, and your team doesn't even have to be playing according to this rule/law.
It's a nice addendum. I like that. It's a strong addendum by you. So go to Jasper's. It's the next evolution of the sports bar. They got great food, great happy hour. It's a great place to watch the tournament this weekend and the next weekend. Great place to watch Predators games if you're a Nashville Predators fan. They got great happy hours for that. So grab and go market, free parking, all the great stuff. Go to Jasper's. Chris, good to see you, man. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. And I guess I'll start with one of your tweets, which involved Tennessee, Texas A&M, seeding and not getting into the tournament. Just before we get to can Kentucky win the whole thing and, all this stuff in the tournament, your thoughts on Tennessee's seed line. Did they truly get screwed by the committee by being given a 3 seed? And should Texas A&M have been in the tournament?
Well, here's the thing, Braden, screwed means that the committee intended to put them on a seed line that they didn't. It doesn't make any sense. And so I don't know if they intended to do that or not. I don't understand any of the rationales we've been given. By any analytical measure, there is a much more compelling argument that Tennessee would be the best 2 than it would a 3. There's by any analytical measure. And that's what we're told now, that this is what this thing is about. I wrote the numbers down this morning. Tennessee 16-7 in the first 2 quadrants. They have 0 losses outside Q1, which is clearly a top 8 resume. You compare that to, for example, a Duke, which was 6-2 in Q1, 6-3 in Q2. So they're 12-5 in the first 2 quadrants. Tennessee has 5 more Q1 wins than Duke does. That's just an example. The problem I have is that these teams that played in the SEC and in the Big 12, which were the 2 best conferences the entire season, hands down, I felt like these teams, so Tennessee, for example, with that seeding mistake, and then the other 2 teams that I mentioned in that tweet, Texas A&M and Oklahoma, which were left out of the field, those teams are being punished for playing in good conferences. The rationale from Tony Burnett last night on Oklahoma and Texas A&M not making it, more so Oklahoma, was that they had all these Q1 opportunities and they only won 4 Q1 games. They won 5 games against top 15 teams. I'm talking about Oklahoma. That rationale, I don't accept. This is, and we get down to this discussion where, we got a lot of folks out there who have a bleeding heart for these mid-majors. We get a Wyoming put in the field, and we leave out an Oklahoma and a Texas A&M who played in the 2 best conferences all season long. And the rationale from the committee is that, well, they had all of these opportunities and they didn't win enough Q1 games. Well, they're playing Q1 opponents. So those are the biggest gripes that I had. And the problem I have with the coverage from the committee, Braden, is that they get up there in front of the camera and the rationale does not make any sort of sense that follows through.
Yeah, there was a lot of rambling on TV on Sunday afternoon. That is for sure, Sunday evening. I guess, and let's spin this forward because we're going to yell and scream about this for a couple of days, and then basketball is going to start, and we're all going to forget about it. And because essentially, if you are good enough, and Tennessee is good enough, Kentucky is good enough, I'm not sure about Auburn, but I want to get your thoughts on this. If you're good enough, and you're playing well enough, and you do the things you're supposed to, you're gonna give yourself a chance to get to the Final Four, especially Kentucky and Tennessee. and I guess to a lesser extent, maybe Auburn. But all you're really changing, if you switch them with Villanova, for example, and put them on the 2 line, right, the difference between getting to the Sweet 16 to face each other is probably not all that great. And really, you're just talking about the color of the uniform at that point if those 2 teams were to play. So let's say, forget all the stuff we just complained about. Kentucky, Tennessee, Auburn. If you want to include Arkansas, I guess you can, but they've got Gonzaga looming. Which of those teams do you like best to go the furthest? Which team is best situated to go the furthest?
It's probably Tennessee. And first of all, I think they're playing the best of all of those teams. Here's the other thing. Like I have in that region right there, like I think either Villanova or Tennessee is going to end up making the Final Four. I actually have Villanova, but again, like to your point, it doesn't really ultimately matter. But I mean, to me, to answer your question, like I think of those teams, I think Tennessee is probably playing the best. I think Villanova poses a difficult matchup, but in terms of the path, like I see both of those teams getting to that point where you end up playing, you end up playing in that Elite Eight. But look, I think overall, when you look at a Tennessee, and I don't have to tell you, I mean, you follow them as closely as anybody. Guard play is a big deal at this time of the year. I think the ability to have shot makers ends up being a big deal because these games slow down. They are inherently lower possession, slower games in the NCAA tournament. I think some of the shot makers that they have found over the last couple of weeks of the season, I think is a big deal for Tennessee. So I think they are, of those teams you mentioned, it's obviously the reason they won the SEC tournament. I think they're playing the best out of that grouping.
Kentucky, let's start with the Wildcats. I like the way this team is made up. You've got a veteran point guard. You've got a dominant big man. It does feel like they're more of a half-court team, even though they want to get out and run a little bit. Is this one of John Calipari's best teams in terms of how it's built, how it's constructed, a lot of leadership, all transfers, no one-and-dones? Like, I like Kentucky to come out of their region as well to get to the Final Four, and I've long believed that this is the best team in the SEC. I know Tennessee's playing better right now. What will be Kentucky's downfall if it doesn't make a deep run?
They have to make shots, and so that's a big part of that is getting Kellen Grady going back again. Davion Mintz had been shooting the ball well, and they just had a bad game in the SEC tournament. Here's the thing with Kentucky that I like, Braden, that's different to your point is this team to me is more equipped to make a run because of how old they are. Like this is as old a group. And I love how Cal sort of under the cut has made this transition, to now we're going to be old. And that's what Calipari does. Like he kind of goes with where he thinks the trend is headed. And this is where the trend is headed. You have the best player in the country, arguably. He's not the most talented, but he's obviously been the most dominant in terms of that skill set, in terms of rebounding the basketball. I think the game's the loss. Like when you go back, and one of the things I do this time of year, Braden, is I go back and I look at games that teams have lost, the teams that I think could potentially get to a Final Four. And you look at a bulk of those losses that Kentucky took during the season, they were missing guys, either going into that game or they were missing guys that got hurt during those games. And so I think some of those losses were a little bit obscured for Kentucky. But when you play the way they do, when you play as fast as they do, and when you really want to take advantage of how good Severe Goodman is, you've got to be able to knock down perimeter shots. And when they had that stretch, second half of SEC play, Braden, they were really shooting the ball well. I mean, those two guys, Grady and Mintz especially, were really, really shooting the basketball well. So look, it's not like you can just turn on a switch and start making shots. But I think there's a lot to trust about this group just because of how old they are and the composition of the profile of the guys that they have.
So why do I not trust Auburn then?
Because their guard play has been spotty, and I don't want to kind of hit the universal talking point, but again, I'm a big believer, and it is cliche, but you've got to be able to have guards who you rely on. And the thing with Auburn, again, analyze the losses. The problem for Auburn has been their inability to finish games. Their play down the stretch of games. Even in the loss the other day in the SEC tournament, like they can't make plays late in that game, which is a problem. The other thing that's a concern for me is Walker Kessler's health. Like that shoulder it looked to me to be a bit of an issue over the last couple games of the regular season and then in the SEC tournament. And then look, their best player is Jabari Smith, but it's the same argument I would make for Duke and Paolo Banchero. Those guys are not Carmelo Anthony or Kevin Durant freshmen. They're going to go obviously at the top of the draft, but they're not put the team on my back and carry them to a Final Four like a Carmelo did. They're just not those types of players, especially when, in the case of Jabari, I don't like where you're getting them the basketball. So there's just a lot of unreliability about Auburn that I think, started to pop up its head down the end of the season.
Dwayne Wade, right? Like that takes Marquette to the Final Four. Yeah. Yep. All right. Arkansas, LSU, Alabama. There's talent there. Tons of it. Lots of other things as well for all those three teams. Anybody else from the SEC you like to do any damage, or is it basically just those big three?
No, I think it's those big three. I like Arkansas, and they ran into a bit of a buzzsaw. They ran into a Texas A&M team that was shooting as well as they've shot it all year. And again, I mean, this is what makes the tournament one of the magical things that it is, and it's how, sometimes when you're looking at an upset, teams that shoot the ball well can shoot you out of a game. They can also, upset or can shoot you into a game. And I think that's kind of what happened with Texas A&M. But I thought Arkansas was playing really, really well. Again, they have a lot to trust on the perimeter. JD Note, I thought really was on a mission towards the end of the season. There's too much going on with LSU, and I don't trust them enough. And I don't think they have enough winning fiber, winning mentality. There's too much negative going on, not just with Will Wade, but that permeates. Now all of a sudden, guys, you wonder where their heads are at. So I'm not real high on them. I think Arkansas has got the potential. I think they're playing in a tough region. Yeah. But I think of those teams you mentioned, I think Arkansas is probably the other one.
Well, and Alabama can beat literally every single team in the entire tournament and could lose in the first game. So that's the beauty of Alabama. Your Final Four as of time of taping here early in the week, who's your Final Four?
Yeah, I've got Gonzaga, and they're going to be hard to beat, man. Like I think they are. Remember, stuff carries over, and it has carried over multiple years. Like everybody wants to say, well, they haven't won a national championship. Yeah, but they've won a lot of games in this tournament. And by the way, played in a title game last year, and there's DNA left over. So I think Gonzaga. And by the way, I think their region's tough, but they don't have to play the tough part of that region. So I like Gonzaga. I like Kentucky. We've talked about. I like Kansas. Kansas had a hell of a year, and I think everybody spent so much time nitpicking Kansas instead of focusing on what Kansas does really well. Kansas is one of the best offensive teams, one of the most explosive offensive teams in college basketball. They've got an All-American in Ochai Agbaji. They've got another guy who I thought was screwed out of first team All Big 12 in Christian Brown. And then I think if anybody watched the Big 12 tournament, the Big 12 was, they and the SEC were the two best conferences all year. I think what people fail to realize is Kansas shared the regular season title and they won the conference tournament title. I mean, that's how good that team was this year. And I think anybody who watched the Big 12 tournament saw that Remy Martin is started to play better. Like he's been hurt all year. And I was talking to Bill Self. I did one of their games a couple weeks ago. And I said, what's the ceiling? Like, how do you become a Final Four team? And he said, we have to see what Remy does. Like if Remy comes back and he's effective, we got a chance to be really good. He's back, played well in Kansas City. So I like Kansas. And then I've got Villanova. But like I said, this is the one I'm least sure about. Yep. Here's what I do know. It's either going to be Villanova or Tennessee out of that region. I do not trust Arizona as much.
I agree.
I think they're kind of an upstart. Doesn't mean I don't think they're good. But not having Kirk Crease is a big deal. So I think it's I've got Nova, but it could be Nova or Tennessee out of that region.
It's probably frowned upon to read your own tweets during an interview, but I sent this at 5:55 p.m. on Sunday. Gonzaga over Kentucky, Kansas over Villanova, Gonzaga over Kansas.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah, I think we both agree the volatility this year is going to be interesting.
Yeah, you're with me, bud. All right, let me shift gears here a little bit and talk media with you for just a second. And what is the one thing that this sport, like what's the one problem with the media that covers this sport? Is it parachuting in March and not understanding the full complexity of the season? Is it the committee behind closed doors making decisions and their inability to explain it? What is the one media hurdle that this sport faces that if they could clear might allow the game to flourish in a more successful way?
Well, in this particular year, it's Tom Brady's announcement. and I'm not even making a joke. Like I thought what he did last night was disgusting. You know, like he waited
until after the selection show, at least.
Bro, it was lowball, man. It's exploiting. Like he had to do. I understand the timing, but like college basketball gets screwed as a result of that. So, but obviously that's a one-off. But it's a killer, man. Look, I don't mind the parachuting in. I have to laugh at some of the analysis because these people, you know, instead of saying, look, I've only been covering the sport for a week and a half. Right. They come off like they're experts. That I have a problem with. But the parachuting in, brother, you know, the sport could use as much coverage as it can get. So like, I welcome all parties. Come on in. The problem I have is, and look, I work for ESPN. So full disclosure. And after I say what I'm about to say, I'm probably never going to work for CBS. But, you know, and it kind of goes along with the parachuting in. But you have a network covering the biggest event, one of the biggest events in all of sports playoffs that doesn't cover the sport all year. And then you have a network that does cover the bulk of it for the season that is now sort of extricated from the party. Look, CBS and Turner paid a lot of money for it. But when you've got some of the people, and we know who they are, some of the people who do come in and have to start covering the sport, I think it makes it more about, you know, putting those people on screen and trying to drive attention through those people than necessarily the product itself. And I think it does itself a disservice. I thought it was short-sighted by the NCAA when they, you know, the first time they took the tournament away from ESPN. I thought it was a money grab, and we know why. I mean, this tournament makes the bulk of what the NCAA makes in terms of revenue. So that's the big thing. And then the committee is another big part of this. And, you know, I'll leave the CFP discussion to you, but I think it's in the same bag. These people get up on camera, and it's not that they're not smart people. It's that they don't want to box themselves in to like whatever answer they're about to give. The problem with that is you create, I think, a lack of transparency creates more distrust. And I think some of these questions need to be answered. And what ends up happening is you end up marginalizing, you know, teams like at Tennessee. You end up marginalizing these fan bases by giving incomplete answers. And so I think the committee and the lack of transparency and the lack of willingness to answer these questions, by the way, to these entities that have paid a lot of money for your product, I've never understood that.
Is there a way, like, I think some of the parachuting, like you said, some of it's good. Like Charles Barkley just sort of admits, I think what he does well is he just admits, he's like, yeah, I've never watched these teams, but like I'm watching this game, and in the game, he's really good at analyzing the game because he's this larger than life personality with lots of, you know, thought. He's a smart basketball guy. I don't want him on Selection Sunday breaking down the net ranking of like a 9 seed. I don't want to hear that shit from him, but I want to hear him talk about what he's seeing in a game, because then I think it brings more people to the sport, which I think can be a good thing. So I think there's some people that it works well with if they do it correctly. When you look at all these weird conversations about where college sports is heading with these sort of the autonomy 5 soon to take control of every voting right in the sport here in a couple of years. And there's been lots of rumors about this, and just talk about a 65 team. They're their own tournament. It's its own thing. When you hear something like that, because you are pro Texas A&M, pro Oklahoma, big conference, tougher schedule, more proven team that's probably quote unquote better than a Wyoming. What do you think of when you think of the sport having its own 65 teams, doing its own product and trying to go out and sell that to a TV partner?
I can understand the desire to do it. And you remember Bob Huggins had the comment, it was back, you know, beginning of the season, right? Where, you know, he was basically positing that the Power 5 or Power 6 in college basketball, if you include the Big East, should break away. And I can understand why those parties would want to do it. In this day and age, where this thing becomes all about money, and it becomes all about, by the way, like, folks are losing jobs. I mean, that's how valuable the NCAA tournament is to a discussion about coaches. Coaches lose jobs over not getting to the NCAA tournament. And so when you look at a decision where we're going to put a Wyoming, which has an inferior resume to some of these other Power 5 teams, I don't understand. Like, I can understand why, some of these Power 5, Power 6 coaches would want to do that, Braden, and just say, look, we don't trust the NCAA. And by the way, the NCAA is going to be obsolete in probably 5 years. So why would we attach ourselves when college football obviously broke away years ago and has flourished as a result? Why would we continue to pay to allow the NCAA to control so much money in this enterprise? Why would we allow the NCAA, which, again, I think strategically has made decisions based on money that have hurt the sport? Why would we allow that entity to continue to manage our postseason? Yeah. And why would we allow sort of this movement, this bleeding heart for these mid-majors, which, look, I understand these upsets make, for great drama on the first 2 days of the tournament. I get it. I played at a low major. I played at Army. So I understand it. But I also understand, and this is the way of the world, like, you play in those conferences, you are playing better schedules. You have the ability to make more money. You're more marketable. So I understand the argument on the other side. I don't want to lose the mid-majors. But I can understand these Power 5s coaches, looking at this business deal and saying, wait a second, this doesn't seem, we are not getting a big enough of this pie here.
If the tournament were to turn into that, do you think it decreases interest in the tournament, but increases interest in the regular season? Like, is there a ripple effect that maybe more fans are paying attention because almost all of the teams are going to get in, or does it hurt the ratings in the tournament because we're not watching, a Belmont beat an Iowa or whatever?
I think as long as you have a bracket and whatever the number of teams will be, Braden, people are going to gamble on this event. People are going to watch this event, and this event is going to continue to create drama. What creates the drama is not, look, a Northern Iowa beating a Kansas on Ali Farouk Manesh's shot. Obviously, that creates drama. Vermont beating Syracuse and Tom Brennan running around like a chicken without his head. Fantastic. Amazing. But we had amazing moments during these other these major conference tournaments. And again, as long as you have a bracket and as long as you have these teams facing off in a one and done format, you're going to have drama and people are going to watch. So look, I get it. Vanderbilt, Kentucky. And I understand people wanting it, but to me, it's still going to be the same event that it is.
Vanderbilt, Kentucky. That's a team that has no business being around the NCAA tournament, but they almost knocked out Kentucky in a great basketball game in what would be probably a round of 32 type of matchup or Sweet 16 type of matchup if the tournament goes that direction. Yeah. All right, you're in charge. I'll let you go on this one. I know you got to go. You're in charge of college basketball from a coverage, media, rights, TV, all that kind of stuff. I'm not asking you to change the rules of the game per se, but just you're in charge of college basketball. What does the sport need the most to be successful?
Man, I mean, that's a large question. I think the sport needs to look at the calendar first and foremost. Like, we've got to get out as much as we can from under the umbrella of college football in the NFL. Now, look, the NFL keeps extending its season, so that's going to be an impossibility. I mean, they played at what was it, February this year? They played into, So, but we've got to try to get out from under that umbrella because, I mean, the first 2 months of the season, which, by the way, Braden, are two of the more exciting months in the sport. I mean, you get all those MTE events. That's where you get all the non-conference events. Like, we've got to try to, and I've said this for a long time, we've got to move the season back to like December and have the tournament in April and then figure, CBS has to figure out the coverage of the Masters and all of that. But first and foremost, we've got to figure out the calendar because I think you're really putting yourself in a real bind there. We've got to figure out, who's in charge. Like the NCAA runs this thing as a money grab. And I think the thing with college football, outside of the fact that football's a great sport that everybody loves, I'm not marginalizing that, but these conference commissioners run the entire enterprise. And I think we've given the NCAA too much power over a sport. Mostly it's postseason. I mean, that's what drives college basketball. We've given that entity too much control over our sport, and they've made decisions not in the best interest of the sport. They've made decisions based on how they can make the most money. And so I think, I mean, look, whether it's a commissioner, whether it's these conference commissioners end up having a little bit more power, I think we've got to figure that out. But somebody's got to be in charge of the sport. And right now we just, we don't have somebody who's doing that.
Chris, thank you so much for your time, man. I know it's a crazy week for you. Obviously, love watching all your work and congrats on all the success. And the first and only podcast this week that will feature 2 Army shirts in the Zoom call. The only one. The only one. Thank you so much, Chris.
You got it, Braden. Thanks, buddy.
That was Chris Spatola of ESPN. He's got Kentucky, Kansas, Villanova, and Gonzaga, which is the same for I've got. Fill out your brackets, 440 Sports tweet. It's pinned on the top of the profile there, so go check it out. Fill out your bracket. Entry is free, just like the parking at Jasper's. It is free, and they will be giving away a $100 gift card to the winner, so make sure you go sign up and check that out. So thanks to Chris Spatola for joining us. His thoughts, Aaron, on it doesn't matter who's in the bracket. As long as there's a bracket that people can fill out and argue about and gamble on, if it's 65 teams and even if it's a bunch of bad teams, he thinks it doesn't matter. It's still going to be successful as long as there's a piece of paper with a bracket on it. He's good. He says it doesn't matter.
I feel that. I kind of like it the way it is, but
I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah, but it is. There's there's magic to it. I don't ever want that to be stripped away from it.
Are you suggesting that a Georgia basketball team that's won 6 games this year, if they are going up as a 16 seed against number 1 seeded Kentucky, that there wouldn't be any magic there? A Georgia team that's like 6-25.
It excites me less than other things excite me.
Yeah. I agree. It removes the magic, but at the same time, if the 65 teams can keep all the money for themselves and not share it with all those mid-major teams,
that would suck. I would hate that.
Pretty big market force, though. Right?
I would hate it. I love that there being mid-majors is what part of what I think makes tournament what it is. That would be very sad to me.
I agree with you. And you know who else agrees with you? Ali Farouk-Manesh. He agrees with you as well. And if you know who that is, Kansas Jayhawk fans, then you know. If you don't, ask somebody. Go to Jasper's, everybody. Aaron, where can people find you?
The Erin Dugan on Twitter and Erin_Dugan on Instagram.
There you have it. Make sure you check out the YouTube page as well. My name is Braden Gall. You can follow me on Twitter at Braden Gall. Enjoy the tournament, everybody. We'll be back next week with State of the Union and returning starters and back to hardcore football. But enjoy the NCAA tournament, everybody. Fill out a bracket, join the 440 Sports group, and we'll give out some free stuff a little bit later on this month as well. For Aaron, for Chris, my name is Braden. Thank you guys all for listening. This has been Fringe Element on the 440 Sports Network.